Getting to the heart of the matter. Back to Guy, Ben, and Frank with more Inside the News.
Welcome back to Wayman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News. This is a segment that Ben proposed this when we go through our pre-production meetings and stuff. He says, this is the key topic. And Ben even said this in one of our breaks here, even today. Nobody is talking about this. Let's welcome back Frank Vernuccio with the American Analysis of News and Media, Ben Brunson, the author of The Falstaff Enigma, and Esther Sling. Okay, we are going to start with you, Ben. Normally we go to Frank in this section here, but the election, and if Donald Trump should be on the ballot, do the states, and this is going to be a constitutional thing that will bring in Frank in as well, but can the states remove Trump's name from the ballot if he is a convicted felon? Ben, your first thoughts go.
Well, I was going to start by setting up the scenario, which is highly likely at this point. Trump looks to be the runaway nominee winner for the Republican Party. His popularity keeps going up. He's doing a very good job. It's remarkable that under all the pressure he has with indictments, more indictments than I can count, and apparently more coming, he can still go in front of interviewers and talk about issues. And really, he doesn't go out there and go, oh, woe is me, I'm being, he'll mention he's being targeted. Of course he is, but he does an incredible job of actually staying on relevant issues for the American people. So he's likely going to be the nominee, but he's equally likely, and we've talked about this before, it's very possible he'll be a convicted felon come election day in November next year. And that is a scenario that, as far as I know, we've never faced before in this country, in which one of the two primary candidates is a convicted felon on the date of the election. And so the question becomes, how do the Democrats take advantage of that? Because we all know they will do anything in their power to stop Donald Trump. So the question in my mind is, will Democratic parties that have control of state legislatures make a move to try to remove Trump's name from ballots on the basis that a convicted felon, can't run for president or federal office? And so I'm going to defer to Frank on this because he's really the constitutional expert.
Okay, Frank, I was just thinking as Ben was talking there about convicted felons, and maybe we should be talking, what happens if the guy from Enron was a convicted felon? Would he be able to run and get into the White House? What about Charles Manson? He murdered somebody, but that's a convicted felon. And you could start, this would be precedent setting down the road. Well, hey, just because he's a felon, that's not going to preclude him from being on the ballot. Frank, we got a loaded gun there.
While the specific question of a convicted felon running for president, there's no precedent for it. There is precedent in numerous Supreme Court cases as to the jurisdiction of the federal government versus the state government and criteria for running for federal office. And under those circumstances, I don't think the states would have, frankly, any constitutional ability to change the rules of the game. Now, they can decide that a convicted felon does not have the right to vote in that particular state. So let's assume, and I'm not sure whether it does or not, whether Florida has a provision that says a convicted felon does not have the right to vote. They can prevent that convicted felon from voting in a federal election. But there's no criteria that Florida can establish that would stand constitutional muster to change the criteria of what it takes to be eligible to run for president of the United States, or even for the United States Senate. So I don't think that the states would have the ability at all to decide that a convicted felon, in this case, the possibility is Donald Trump, that he could not, that he would be taken off the ballot, and that would stand constitutional muster. So the answer, I think, that the long-winded explanation is no, they could not take him off the ballot. Although if he was a citizen of their state, they could prevent him from voting for himself as a candidate for president. Now, there's a non-political but very real topic that has to be discussed when we're bringing all this up. The public reaction to individual states trying to take a presidential candidate who, quite frankly, is still very popular off the ballot, I think would be the most severe the most severe law and order crisis the United States has faced since the Civil War. It would literally be the Democratic Party declaring war on the Constitution of the United States. It would be the Democratic Party declaring war against the whole concept of free elections and the people having the right to choose their own candidates. This, I think, is almost as important as the constitutional issue. It would literally tear the country apart. It would be tantamount to a judicial civil war and perhaps a physical civil war in some cases as well.
Well, Frank, we're almost having that right now around the First Amendment. And you look at the Democrats, they don't even have a right to choose their own candidate because they say Biden will not debate. And guess what? You're stuck with Biden. We're going to shove it down your throat. And RFK, he's saying, I think now Biden should be investigated. So Kennedy's even up the ante against Biden right now, Ben.
Well, look, RFK is actually waging a pretty interesting campaign, despite receiving all of the types of inbound fire from the Democrats that typically you only see delivered towards Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. So he's public enemy number 2 for the Democrats. No one's going to replace Trump on that number 1 spot, but RFK is making a run for the money there. And so there's a lot of fear over his candidacy. We just talked about an issue that is very concerning and that comes about because Trump is the nominee. But let's talk about an issue that I've given a lot of thought to, where Trump could be exactly the right nominee for this election. And we've talked about in the past, abortion being the big stealth issue that drives a lot of women. We saw it in the midterms. We've seen it in special elections, where this issue that Republicans don't really want to talk about anymore, but there's this perception, and it's being driven in Democratic circles every day, that the Republicans want to ban abortion completely across the country, and some Republicans do. But that is clearly not where the country's at, an outright ban on abortion. What is interesting to me is that of all the nominees in the Republican Party who are likely to win, perhaps the one who could actually state the case that he is in a middle position, a moderate position, and be believed is Donald Trump. And that's because a lot of people have always suspected Donald Trump, is a closet kind of liberal when it certainly comes to social issues. And I think he's actually believable as a candidate to go in front of the general voter populace and say, look, we're for a very reasonable, let's propose a 20-week ban, but we're still going to let states decide what they want. But I think that's a position that actually people would believe. So he might be the right candidate when it comes to that very important issue.
Wow. Well, there is so much more there that the guys and myself would like to discuss. We want to thank you so much for listening to us. We want to thank the affiliates on down the line for carrying the program, and we hear from them, and they enjoy the depth that we go into going behind the news and inside the news, because there's not another program like it across the country. Stay with us, because are Americans losing interest in the Ukrainian war? I'll tell you what, fascinating discussion yet to come. We'll be back.
You're listening to Wayman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.